So I think we've all had this experience of being called in to the careers teacher. What are you going to do when you grow up? I pretty well had decided, after having my first article published in a newspaper, that I was going to be a writer, and the best way training for a writer would be to be a reporter. And I read a lot of books from Graham Greene, who was a big novelist at the time. I'd read all his books, and he'd been a reporter, so I wanted to be a reporter. So when I was called into the careers office, I explained that I did not want to go to university, which was not common at the school. I said, I want to be a journalist. And the teacher kind of looked down his nose at me and said, well, I think you're on your own with that one. So anyway, okay, well, whatever. So I left school, didn't go to university. I got a job as what in England was called a dusbinman, and in North America we call it a garbage collector. And in those days it was none of this hydraulic stuff. You had to go around the back of the house, pick up the dustbin, put it on your shoulder, come out, bang bang on the truck, and then take the bin back. And of course a lot of the bins were galvanized steel, and they had holes in the bottom, and people used to throw out their food, which would rot, and the lid wasn't on, and it would rain, and when you picked it up and put it on your shoulder, you get all these rotting fish and chips and rotting chicken pouring down your back. Anyway, it was for me, I'd been away at school, a very privileged background in that sense. So to be out on the bins with the men, being one of the team was a great education for me, a great education. And I saved all the money, and my father was very impressed by that. So I had said that I want to go to Africa. He'd been in Africa during the Second World War, and I wanted to go to Africa. And I decided that I would hitchhike from Cape Town to Cairo. So I saved all the money from the dustbin man, and he put the money in for a passage on a ship, steerage of course, nothing too grand, and off I went. And we sailed on September the 13th on a Friday, so the ship was not that full, and it was a fantastic passage. The only way to get into first class, there was a way to get into first class. Every day they would do a thing called the ship's run, and you could put money on this. So you'd bet, well, I think we did 300 miles yesterday from noon to noon. And the numbers would all be called in first class. So of course I would go every day, so I could go in and snoop around first class. And there were these two, they seemed at the time elderly, but they were probably only middle-aged, because I was 18 at the time. And they said to me, well, you're traveling alone, how brave, how adventurous, and what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm going to hitchhike from Cape Town to Cairo. And one of the ladies, now this is a lady, very finely dressed, traveling in first class, looked at me and said, well, just remember, you can always sleep in a police jail. All you have to do is go and tell them that you need a place to sleep, and they'll put you in the jail for the night. How she knew this, I have no idea. But day after day, in these little places, dorps they call them, these little kind of little towns in South Africa, I would go to the police station and say, excuse me, but can I sleep in your jail? I was only refused once. One occasion, the officer made me turn my pockets out and fill in the book and actually locked me in. Most of the time, they just said, sure, go down the corridor. The one time I was refused was when I was hitchhiking from Pretoria to Johannesburg in pouring rain. So it was dark, it was raining, nobody would stop. But this vehicle stopped, and off we set off to Johannesburg, and it turned out that he was a homicide detective. So he asked me what I was doing, and I said blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, can I sleep in the jail tonight? And he said, well, yeah, you can, but you won't be alive in the morning if I arrange it. He said, but what I will do is I'll take you to a hotel that's safe, but you lock the door and do not open it, never mind what you hear, nor who comes to the door or knocks on the door during the night. So I said, oh, okay. So before that, though, he said, I'll take you out for dinner. So we went to this steak restaurant. We sat down in the booth. Menus came, great, sirloin steak, fantastic. And then the owner of the place came over, and it was this lady, and it was the kind of lady you didn't want to cross. And she looked at this homicide detective and she tore him up one side and down the other. How dare you come into my restaurant with your gun? You boys know the rules. You have to put the gun on the table when you're in my restaurant. Yes, yes, he said. Oh, very sorry, very sorry. And he took the gun out and put it on the table while we had our dinner. And then he drove me to this cheap hotel and made me promise that I would not open the door no matter what I heard, no matter who knocked on the door. And if I did that, I would be safe. And so I stayed there overnight. And then the next day I was on my travels again. And eventually I hitchhiked all the way up. I hitchhiked all the way to Nairobi. And after that, it was getting very difficult to hitchhike. So I then flew to Juba in southern Sudan. And I changed planes in Entebbe. And at that time, President Idi Amin was visiting the airport. A surprise visit, huge airport. It was about 2 weeks or a month before the Israeli raid on the Entebbe airport to rescue some hostages. And there were two other passengers on this flight. One lady was working for a Swiss NGO, and the other one was a young priest called the Reverend Tutu, who became very famous as Bishop Tutu of South Africa. And he and I ended up sharing a room together. And then the next day we flew on to Juba. We got on the plane. It was a Sudan Airways flight. And the captain came on and said, "We hope you have a pleasant journey and a safe landing." And then we took off and we flew to Juba. And then from Juba, I took a paddle boat down the Nile, through the Sud, and then on, and then eventually reached Cairo. And the whole journey took 7 months. That entire time, I carried with me my typewriter because I wanted to be a writer. Every day I wrote, typed a letter to my parents, and I was also writing a novel. And it was the Adler Tipperess that my father so generously had bought for me. So it was a very special occasion. But that was my first big travel, to hitchhike from Cape Town to Cairo at the age of 18.